So after reading The Lord of the Rings again, I thought to myself, they made a movie out of this. In fact, they made several movies. There's 3 that Peter Jackson made, and there's an animated version by Ralph Bakshi. I'm going to be talking about the Jackson version in terms of my comparison. But before we get started, I just want to do a quick comparison between the unauthorized edition and the authorized edition. So you may notice when you look at the top, it says the authorized edition. It's because of this particular version right here. So Ace, the publisher of this version, basically stole the story without first consulting Tolkien on if they could do it or not. They wanted to do this in an effort to put it in paperback, which Tolkien was very, very against. So obviously when he heard about this, he was quite outraged. So instead, they corrected it with the authorized version. Basically, they had to ask Tolkien if they could publish this version beforehand. But what's rather interesting is you'll notice the covers. Obviously, there's a fair bit of inaccuracy here as he's Gandalf the Grey. And all these people look kind of tall to be hobbits, don't you think? Well, here it's kind of hard to tell what exactly the picture is. I'm going to guess maybe that's supposed to be the Shire. Even though these covers were very inaccurate, apparently Tolkien actually preferred these covers as opposed to these ones. Now here are the other big things that are different. The first thing is on the inside there is this little illustration here. This is not found in the authorized edition. Come to think of it, I really can't tell what this picture is supposed to be, unless maybe that's Tom Bombadil? So the foreword is the same in both books, but there's nothing about the author's experience writing the book like there is in the authorized edition. But here's probably one of the other bigger changes, is the map. This looks very realistic, as if you were in this location, you'd probably be able to find your way around just fine. It looks like an actual legitimate map. Here though you can see that the map is hand-drawn. Not only that, but it takes up 2 pages. But as far as I can tell, and bear in mind it's been a while since I've read the authorized edition, it seems like it's pretty much the same story throughout, although there might be a few little misconceptions here and there, which Tolkien would later go back and fix up in the first authorized edition. That's all I've got for comparing these 2 versions together. Now it's on to comparing the book to the movie. I've always been a visual person, so when I'm talking about the book, I'll put this one up, and if I'm talking about the movie, bear in mind this is the Peter Jackson version, I'll put this one up. Probably the thing I find the most miraculous about it is that it's almost a 3-hour movie. I do know there's an extended cut out there, but I didn't feel that brave for it. I just wanted to know what my older brother was obsessed with back in the early 2000s. But it's crazy. It's almost a 3-hour movie, but yet it is very fast moving. Sure, there are a few slow sections, but the book is a whole lot slower. For the most part, it seems like the movie's almost like a abridgment. We'll start at the very beginning. So, in the book, we celebrate Bilbo's 111th birthday. There is a lot that goes into the preparation of this. The idea that Frodo kind of talks to Gandalf for a little bit. Bilbo gives this really long speech right before he disappears. What I find rather fascinating is that they already start off by introducing the characters of Merry and Pippin in the movie. But both of these characters are just clowns. I mean, there is a section in the book where Pippin isn't necessarily the most professional on the journey, but not nearly as bad as it is in the movie. Bilbo's speech has been cut down substantially for the movie. I think this is just to kind of keep up pacing, because if they were to do a word-for-word speech, it would probably take about like 10-15 minutes. as opposed to the 5 we got here. And then from there, it's mostly a lot of condensing. So in the book, Gandalf is rather curious about this ring, as he's starting to notice that whoever has it seems to kind of be possessed by this dark force and starts referring to it as their precious. So he goes over the archives to try to figure out what in the world this ring is all about. A few years pass. Frodo is left alone in the Shire, as well as with all the other worldly possessions of Bilbo after he left. And Gandalf explains that this is the one ring of true power. The one way you can be sure is you take it off and you cast it into the fireplace. And there you will get elfin runes that look like this. I will admit, this book has a lot of nerdiness attached to it, but I am not big enough of a nerd to try to actually pronounce how this is supposed to be. So with this knowledge, Gandalf then goes to his master, known as Saruman, which they refer to as the Many Colors after he kind of goes mad with power. They never really make a mention of this in the movie, although there is quite a sweet little wizard's duel between the two, which that is absent from the book. What's interesting is how they reveal that Saruman has turned to evil. In the book, it's revealed that Saruman wants the one true ring to himself. He figures that he can use the power to rule the land instead of Sauron, the one who made the ring in the first place. However, here, he's just straight up evil. Basically says, yeah, there's no way we can defeat Sauron. Why don't we just surrender to him? It'll be a lot easier. And after this, Gandalf is imprisoned on top of the tower at Isengard. Now, before Gandalf left, he told Frodo that he would have to leave the Shire soon, as Gandalf is not the only one that knows about the ring. The previous owner, a detestable creature known as Gollum, which I think everybody knows how he sounds, told the Dark Lord Sauron where he can find it. The plan was that Frodo would leave in the summer under the guise that he was moving back to his ancestral home in Buckland, where all the other Bagginses lived. Here, Gandalf just says, go straight to the Prancing Pony, and I will meet you there in a town called Bree. This is a really big abridgment from the book, as Frodo waits several months for Gandalf to return, until it's about the middle of the fall when Frodo says, you know what, I should probably get going. Gandalf hasn't showed up, so something bad must have happened. So he goes there under the guise of moving back, taking along his manservant known as Sam Gamgee. So while Frodo and Sam are on their way, they find a rather mysterious figure that they deem a black rider. He's a mysterious rider, dipped in head to toe in a dark hood and a black horse. And I love how they made him look in the movie. Like, this is basically how I visualize them to look like. Although part of me feels like that they should have red eyes in that hood, but the book says very specifically that they don't have a form. It's just the robes that drape over them to make it look like there's something there. Once he makes it to his old ancestral home, he finds that Merry and Pippin all knew about this conspiracy. Sam was quite concerned for him, so he told them. Frodo is justifiably a little annoyed by this, but figures, you know what, let's just roll with it. The first thing they have to do is get out of town. The way they do that is through a back entrance in the woods. Now, they don't really say it exactly, but it's like the trees are alive in the back forest, as it seems like they can kind of rotate and turn, and it seems like at some points they start to talk, or they even lull hobbits into a false sense of security. There is one such tree that sings a lullaby and casts a giant sleeping spell over all of them. However, Frodo is outside before the trees eat all the others. He tries his best to get him out, but the tree will not relent. Just then, a mysterious creature known as Tom Bombadil starts skipping merrily through the forest. He's kind of the master of this woods, and he convinces the tree to let Frodo's companions go. It even lets him stay at his house for a little bit. Now, what's rather fascinating about this character of Tom Bombadil is the idea that the ring doesn't affect him. He wants to see what it looks like, so he puts it on. Usually whenever anybody puts on the ring, they turn invisible, which obviously it's the same in the movie. But here he puts on the ring and nothing happens. After about a day or two with Tom Bombadil, they decide they must be on their way to a land known as Bree. While on the way to Bree, they are almost assaulted by another Black Rider when they come across a sort of nemesis of Frodo, Maggot. Basically, Frodo kept stealing all his mushrooms, and Maggot never let him forget it. He would always beat him, and the dogs would often chase him like crazy. However, he seems a little nicer under the circumstances, as there's so many weird goings on around this time with everything kind of descending into darkness. They spend a little bit there before they hop the ferry, and they go straight into Bree. That's quite an abridgment from how it happens in the book, wouldn't you say? At Bree, we have another little cut. So, obviously, they go into a lot more detail in the book about what the inn is like, all the weird inhabitants there, as well as why it's full up to the brim. However, I don't think that's really needed in terms of the movie. But what I do find different is how they introduce the character of Strider. He is kind of built up as this big, mysterious figure, and Frodo, not really feeling up to the party, is kind of drawn to him, so he kind of sits by him and even starts to talk to him a little bit. However, one thing leads to another, and Pippin accidentally reveals some details of their quest, not really giving the idea of the One Ring, but revealing the idea that Frodo is a Baggins instead of Underhill, which the Black Riders have been looking for a Baggins all over, and most of the people are wondering why. Frodo tries his best to get in his way, when all of a sudden the ring kind of jumps out of his pocket and goes right into his finger. He disappears, and immediately everybody just starts freaking out. He walks over back to his little corner with Strider, where he takes off the ring and becomes visible again, to which Strider says, "That was a very stupid thing to do." In order to try to save face, Frodo then starts going, "Haha, I'm over here, see, I just crawled underneath all the tables." But everybody at Bree is just not buying it. After some talking to Strider, he uses his real name of Baggins, but Frodo doesn't catch on to this right away, and says that he wants a conversation with him in his room. This is very different from how the movie does it. It's very abridged, so they show Strider sitting there in the corner. After Frodo accidentally puts on the ring and becomes visible again, Strider basically picks him up by the collar and says, "I need to talk to you now." Which kind of ruins the mystery that was built up in the book version, and plus it just makes him seem a lot more like a thug, in my opinion. There is kind of a fun moment here in the movie, where basically all the other hobbits see Frodo being taken away, and so they just start raising up their swords or what other weapons they have, saying, "You will not take Frodo without a fight!" Which there was kind of a similar reaction to that in the book, but not too much of an extent. Now, what's rather interesting about the book is that they introduce the sword of Isildur. I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation, but that's how I read it. The sword broke in half, and when Strider tries to defend himself, he takes out that sword, but half of it is missing. Here in the movie, it's a whole sword, and right away the hobbits just seem to kind of trust him right away. Well, in the book, he had to earn their trust. He gave him little scraps of information to just try to get him on their side. When all of a sudden, the innkeeper comes in with a letter. This innkeeper's very forgetful because everything has just been so crazy busy lately. He gives the letter to Frodo, and he finds out it's from Gandalf. He sent it about a month ago, saying that things have come up and he probably won't make it. Instead, I want you to meet my good friend, Strider, who knows about the quest and wants to aid you whenever possible. I feel like that's something that should have been kept in the movie. Strider's first course of action is to say to stay into a different room, because he knows that the Black Riders will come there in the middle of the night and attempt to kill them. The movie does a really good job with this. They keep kind of flashing back and forth between the sleeping hobbits and the room that the Black Riders are actually in, so it looks like they're about to just kind of go crazy on them. But, just like in both, it's a ruse. From there, Strider shows the way, to an old observatory. It used to be a big tower that everybody used to look at and figure out where the next place they should go is. Before they go, they need a horse to be able to carry their stuff because the ponies that they used to have before were all scared away by the Black Riders. There's a rather dishonest person here in town that sells them an old, broken down pony at nearly triple the cost of what a healthy one should be. But they still take it and name it Bill the Pony. They say that this animal was quite horribly abused because only a few days out and he's already looking healthier than he used to be. Now there's a brief mention of Bill the Pony in the movie, but just by name. So as they're heading to this tower, they see what seems like a fireworks show off in the distance. Frodo is maybe wondering if it's Gandalf trying to send signals or something. We find out later that it was Gandalf having to defend himself against Black Riders, and that was his fireball attack to be able to get them away. But they can't be defeated. It seems like fire is their one major weakness. It's something that they don't have any control over, so they try to run away from it. But anyway, they make it to the tower, and they find scorch marks to make it look like that there was a recent battle there. That is when they are assailed by the Black Riders again. From there, it kind of plays out how it does in the movie. The Black Riders see the party on top of the hill, and they stab Frodo. However, what's very different about the movie is that Frodo in the book actually attempts to give a good fight. He ends up stabbing one of them in the feet and even tries his best to be able to fend them off. However, in the movie, he's just kind of groveling on the ground saying, "Don't kill me, don't kill me, don't kill me." I kind of like how it happened in the book a little better. His blade is slowly poisoning his heart, and he's starting to slowly go cold. The only thing that will save him now is the house of Elrod in Rivendell. Aragorn knows some very potent plants to be able to keep him stable, but elf magic is the only thing that's going to cure him of it. So they're going along slowly, when all of a sudden they are assailed by 9 of them in total. Right before Frodo blacks out, he sees this giant ball of water come over and wash all the Black Riders away. It's very similar to the movie in the idea that the water almost seems like a bunch of galloping horses. But what's different is they run into an elf rider in both versions. Here it's Erwin, and here it's Glorfindel. He only shows up for that one section to get him out, and that's it. In the movie, it was actually Arwen that cast the spell. But in the book, it was Gandalf. He was able to escape on the wings of a golden eagle, which is showed in the movie, but once again, it's very abridged. Not even this idea that wizards can talk to animals, and where in the world is Radagast the Brown? While there are 3 books in the series, it's technically 6, because about halfway through there's a little indent, and it tells you when the other books begin, like here, for example. Frodo is able to wake up in Rivendell, and the elfin magic is able to stabilize him quite a fair bit. Gandalf is in the room and catches him up to speed. Very similar in the movie, but very, very cut down. With everybody here, they have to figure out what to do with this one ring. So they hold a council. In the book, there is a giant feast first. In the movie, it's just a giant council. Everybody's just kind of sitting around figuring out what to do. But probably one of the biggest differences I did not see coming is this character of Boromir. In the book, he is described as having a horned helmet. Now in the movie, Sean Bean's Boromir does not have any sort of helmet, but they do mention the idea that he has a horn that he always keeps with him, just like in the book. And there's nothing about the idea that he came down there because of a dream. He wanted to try to figure out what this giant riddle he was given was supposed to mean. And there they talk about the idea of Isildur's sword having to be remade again, as well as just the general quest of the ring. So what's rather interesting is, in the book, Bilbo is in Rivendell, and he is the first one to come up and saying, I will take the ring to Mount Doom and take care of it. I should finish what I started. But Gandalf says, that is not your problem anymore. This has been passed down to Frodo. No such mention in the movie. Basically, Frodo just comes up and says, I will take it. And then everyone else is just kind of like, okay, but not just you. I mean, all the hobbits have to go. It's almost word for word what Merry and Pippin say to convince them to go along. And then they also have Gimli the dwarf, Legolas the elf, Gandalf the wizard, and Boromir and Strider. His real name is Aragorn. And they all go on this big quest. I think the movie does a pretty good job with keeping the pace of this, especially kind of switching back and forth between Saruman trying to gather his armies as well as trying to stop their quest. In the book, it's a lot more vague. So, for example, they have to climb this big mountain, but as soon as they start to scale it, the snow just keeps getting horrible, as if some magic spell is trying to do something about it. In the movie, we actually see Saruman casting the spell to be able to get all the snow down. And that, I think, was a pretty good attention to detail right there. In finding out that this trail isn't really going anywhere, they go into the deep mines of Moria. It pretty much plays out the same in both, minus a few little details here and there. Like, obviously the party is in Moria a fair bit longer in the book, and they really sell this idea that they've been underground for so long that their eyes have almost become acclimated to the lack of light. That when they do actually need to go out, it is practically blinding. But probably one of the things I do love about the movie is that in order to get into Moria, there's like this secret door that they need to open. And it's fun to see that as Saruman is trying to figure out how to be able to stop them, that there is a script laying on the table with this drawing in it. That is the secret door to get into Moria. There's a fair bit of shuffling back and forth when all of a sudden they start hearing drumming in the distance, and that is when they are assailed by orcs. And then later, a creature known as the Balrog. It plays out pretty similar in both. In fact, the movie actually makes it a fair bit more thrilling. Which is saying something, because I feel like these are some of the most tense chapters of Part 1. But what I find rather interesting is Gandalf's famous line of, "You shall not pass!" In the book, it's, "You cannot pass!" I think "shall not" sounds a lot better in my opinion, but I just found that so shocking that one of the most quotable lines in that movie wasn't even found in the book. And then the other thing as well is that with this spell, Gandalf is able to cast the Balrog into this deep pit. But unfortunately, before he can away, the Balrog, who has a whip in one hand and a sword in the other, takes his whip and catches Gandalf's ankle and slowly starts dragging him down. In the movie, it's a little different, as the whip more just kind of tugs him towards the edge, and Gandalf just loses his grip. It feels like they could have saved him there. From what I've seen, it felt like the Bashki version handled this a fair bit better, because you can see the whip wrap around his ankle, and he goes falling down, to which he utters the immortal line, "Fly, you fools!" From there, they grieve the loss of their friend for a little bit, but in both interpretations, they have to keep going, lest the orcs assail them again. They have a very good sense of smell, and they are very stubborn creatures that won't let the kill go. They come upon another elf city that are high up in the trees. I like how both make the mention that it's their breathing that's so heavy that that's how they know they've been there for a while. But in the movie, they say that it's the dwarf's fault. This honestly kind of makes sense because they hammer in the book that the dwarves and the elves do not get together at all. Well, here in the movie, this is the first time we're really seeing this divide between the two races. They stay there for a little while, as well as get some insight. There's this place with a magical mirror that both Sam and Frodo look into. Frodo looks into it and sees that the Shire is being overrun by the dark forces of Mordor, and then it ends with seeing a flaming eye with a black slit down the middle. the Eye of Sauron. And there, the ring that he's wearing around his neck is slowly pulling him into the mirror. This, I think, is handled very well in the movie. But what I find rather interesting is they don't really mention the idea that the person that owns the mirror. I am just drawing a blank. I am sorry. I know it begins with a G offhand. Basically, she is the one that has one of the 3 elfin rings. Let's see if I remember. So there was 3 elfin rings, there was 9 to mortal men, and there was 4 to dwarfs offhand. And then there's the Ring of Power they need to destroy, which basically negates all the others and combines all their powers into one. After spending some time there, they realize that they have to go downriver, and that is where their next area will be. Now in the book, there is a bit of a fork in the road. So Boromir comes from a city known as Midas Tirith. The main reason he wanted to be part of this party is A, to use the ring to be able to help his people there, but B, to maybe be able to have this group go there to be able to protect them against the forces of Sauron. While going down the river, it's up to Frodo to decide. He really can't tell which is the better course of action, to keep going and then drop the ring to fire Mount Doom, or to help the people that have helped so many for so many years. In both, Boromir is very anxious to get the ring, and even tries to get it by force. This involves Frodo then putting on the ring and then quietly escaping. In the book, he is completely invisible, when Sam, who's basically his right-hand man, as well as a pretty good friend, is able to follow him. He starts to see the boat mysteriously drift off by itself and knows that it has to be Frodo. He goes to jump in, but he completely misses and he can't swim. Frodo, out of pity, then goes to collect Sam, and then they go down the river together. And that is where the book ends. Now in the movie it plays out very similarly. In the book, Frodo said he wanted an hour to try to think things over. And then everybody just kind of wonders where he disappeared to. In the movie, he just wanted some alone time, where Boromir also tries to get the ring by force. And it's almost kind of comical how fast Boromir regrets what he'd done. Here in the book, I feel like there's a little more time between him cooling down from the anger and realizing what he actually did to ruin the quest. In the movie, though, Frodo starts to run away, but everybody knows this. In fact, Aragorn even has the chance to be able to stop him, but figures that Frodo must know his own path and leaves. Now, the movie actually continues a little bit into the beginning of Book 2. Now, in the Two Towers, it starts off with the idea of Boromir being slain by a whole bunch of weird orcs that are being led by Saruman. This is briefly touched upon in the movie, as we actually see Saruman creating as well as giving orders for these orcs to be able to capture the halflings. That's the code that they have for hobbits. Boromir drops in battle, but not before giving several blasts on his horn that he always carries with him. A detail that is mentioned in the book, but is very, very briefly touched upon just for this scene. Boromir dies, and they give a burial at sea. In the scuffle, though, orcs have taken Merry and Pippin. They both go out to try to figure out where these 2 hobbits went, while Frodo and Sam are just kind of looking onto the gates of Mordor saying, is this something we really want to do? And that's where the movie ends. So, like I said, very abridged. And from what little I've seen of the Bashki version, it feels like that one is a little more in tune with the book. Obviously, it's just as abridged as the Jackson movie, because it's like 2.5 hours, and they try to cover almost the first 2 books, which is impressive, because even with an almost 3-hour runtime, there was still a lot that got dropped out of the book. But in general, I was very impressed by this. The effects, though look a little dated here and there, I think still hold up really well. And There are a few liberties taken, which I am a little annoyed with, but it's no deal breaker like some of the other book to movie adaptations that I've covered. So yeah, Lord of the Rings. It might be a cliche, but I think the book is better. But both satisfy my craving to go on a very long and intense adventure that I can just get completely lost in. If there's demand for it, I might also do the other two movies as well, The Two Towers and The Return of the King. However, I have to finish reading those books first before I can do that. Till next time, keep having fun.